Top of the morning, Dan and Amy, and just updating our segment from last hour that Chicago second grade school teacher who read that Maoist book, A is for activist, the Maoist alphabet. And as disquieting as the children's book is, her sing-songy read and explanations even more
Yeah, telling the kids early on that unions are the only way to go.
Yeah.
And more.
She apparently is at Polaris Charter Academy in Humboldt Park. That's where she teaches second grade. Just so you know. Again, she posted the YouTube video reading the children's book for, as an instructional for K through second grade. So she made herself public, and we're just highlighting it for her, trying to be helpful. President Trump, in that extended interview he gave to Lisa Booth for her inaugural podcast, had some interesting comments about the Jacobin left in this country, and particularly as it pertains to the Fourth Estate. Here's what he said about the current state of freedom of the press in this country.
We don't have freedom of the press, for one thing, certainly. You don't have freedom of the press. The big tech has gone wild. And I'm able to get the word out because, I'm able to get it, and then everybody picks it up, including big tech, which is sort of interesting. But other people, when they get canceled, they don't have that. They can't put out a press release that, everybody picks up. It doesn't work that way. No, you don't have it anymore. You don't have freedom of the press is absolutely gone, and the press is just very dishonest.
And the other freedoms are sure to follow. Jack Phillips, Masterpiece Cake Shop.
Yeah.
The baker from Colorado. He is back in court again.
Why?
He won at the Supreme Court level, but that was for declining to bake a custom cake for a same-sex wedding. Now he is being sued because he wouldn't bake a cake celebrating a gender transition. Same underlying issue. The same business practices. And yet they will never let him alone because the nail that sticks up has to be pounded down.
Well, that's just evil.
Jack Phillips stood by his religious convictions in a rational, sensible, fair-minded, frankly Christian way. And he beat them, the Jacobins, but they won't relent. And they expect, as is usually the case, that those on the center right, even those with ostensibly deeply held religious beliefs, will relent if you name call them enough, if you harass them enough, if you litigate them enough. I mean, think about how the Little Sisters of the Poor have been treated, much like Jack Phillips, by the Joe Obama administrations. For more on all this, because we better start getting to some young people and deprogramming them. Pleased to be joined again by Scott Walker, former governor of Wisconsin, of course, now the president and CEO of Young America's Foundation. Scott, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, great to be with you as always. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So Young America's Foundation, under your stewardship, is launching this initiative, this battle plan, if you will, to go after the sort of events that are occurring in our culture that we were just discussing.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. I mean, part of the reason when I came in here, when they first asked me if I'd serve as the president of this tremendous organization, the largest conservative organization focused on young people in the country, been around since William F. Buckley, and some of the earliest leaders were Barry Goldwater and eventually Ronald Reagan. Great history, but I just look at all the work that we've done, and I just started as president a few weeks ago, but this great organization has done and said it's not enough. When you hear stories like this, when you see what we're dealing with, we've got to have a long game plan. The left has been at it for decades. They've been taking over our college campuses, and increasingly we see we're under siege in our culture and in our communications with big tech, as President Trump just talked about. And we've got to fight back with a plan that's not just about winning the battle today, but really about the war for the heart and soul of this great republic. And so that's what the long game plan is. It's a 12-point action plan. People want to see every detail of that, then go to YAF.org, YAF.org/ long game, and it really lays out our plan to go all the way even into elementary school, and not only for students, but to give the parents the tools they need to reinforce the strength of our founding principles and our Judeo-Christian values.
But it's going to be hard because a lot of conservatives are shamed into silence for fear of, social backlash.
It's the combination of the intimidation factor, which I know something about. I mean, they literally, before calling it cancel culture, they were trying to recall me a decade ago for standing up and putting power back in the hands of the hardworking taxpayers and taking it out of the hands of the union bosses and the other big government special interests that were out there. But it's a combination. On one hand, and you really see it on college campuses, where it's not just left-wing professors, it's these activists that try and shame anybody who's got even a remotely center-right approach. But it's also the other part of it, I think, is conservatives, we put our faith in the people. Radicals, liberals put their faith in the government. And so they're constantly looking for ways to get the government more involved in our lives, whereas we're trying to live our lives. And so that's, again, why you can't just solely focus on the battle of the day. There's got to be this long-term, long-game plan. So we're not just winning the battle and then losing sight of all the things the left's trying to do over many decades. We've got to undo it. It's not going to just take a news cycle. It's probably not even going to take just a presidential cycle. We've got to have a long-game plan to win back the hearts and minds of the American people, particularly young people.
It's a challenging assessment to make. On the one hand, yes, you always have to play the long game. On the other hand, you have to have a sense of urgency about addressing what's happening in real time. And that raises some difficult decisions. And I bring this up in the context of what you were just discussing with your plan, and also what Trump had to say about freedom of the press in that podcast. The recent comments by well-respected D.C. Circuit Court Judge Lawrence Silberman about the media being dangerous because we're very close to a one-party control of these institutions, and he's suggesting that the Supreme Court should revisit its landmark 1964 New York Times v. Sullivan decision with respect to First Amendment protections for public officials, that maybe, for example, actual malice as the standard for defamation be relaxed. That makes me nervous, even though I agree with the diagnosis. That cure makes me nervous. And it seems to me that's a good example of what I'm trying to get to, which is that tension between the long game but the exigencies of the moment.
Well, right. We've got to be engaged in both. I mean, for example, we'll go to court if necessary. We've done that successfully even at places like University of California, Berkeley, where they tried to impose, when we brought in Ben Shapiro, these undue burdens with limits on what time it could be. They didn't want to have it after 3 in the afternoon. They didn't want to allow advertising. They wanted to charge these exorbitant security fees that were 3 times more than the left-leaning groups. We went to court in that case and won, and we'll go to court because the Constitution's on our side in any of these cases anywhere in the country. But we'd rather win in the court of public opinion. In the long haul, that's better than, our instinct is not to go to court all the time. And that's where, for example, with big tech, rightfully so, people are understandably concerned. I'm concerned. We've had people on our own team who've been sanctioned on Twitter and Facebook and other places for just ridiculous, out of control, uneven standards that are applied out there. But in cases like that, the answer isn't the federal government coming in and regulating business. The answer in those cases is ultimately, can't happen today, but ultimately, if there's new majorities in the House and the Senate in the future, new leaders in Washington, they should come back and seriously push back on the Section 230 exemptions, but certainly shouldn't add more government to restrict that. Just take away their liability protections if they're going to go from being a platform to being a publisher. But we've got to win those battles right now. We got to engage. We're not giving up on this generation. We're out aggressively working with college students across the nation, and we want to have for example, one of our points is to have 1 million new participants, to have record numbers of conferences and events, to have speakers in all 50 states for campuses all over the country. But we also have to start sooner with middle school and even elementary school, not only the students, but the parents that want to be involved with this, and even to support some of the teachers. The union bosses are the problem. In most cases, teachers just want to teach, and so for those that do, we're going to give them support just like we give the students support to be able to teach, things like objective American history and basic economics. We teach that, we're going to do well.
Are you going to have long game chapters at universities and community colleges and middle schools, and will they let you in?
Well, it's a combination. So for years, YAF has had college chapters. We've started moving into high school. When it comes to middle school, probably less about chapters and more about individual membership and programs. And then when it comes to elementary school, even just getting parents the tools to counter. I'll give you a good example. YF already has a tip line. In fact, again, if people go to yf.org, in addition to if they do /the long game, there's another one, yf.org/tips. And you'd be amazed as to all the things. You can see it. You can pick your states, Illinois, Wisconsin, any other state in the country, and see the things we're looking into. We got a tip from students at Iowa State. So it wasn't even just about the campus. We all the time hear about crazy left-wing professors. We hear about ridiculous ideas that just a few years ago we would never imagine, of segregating students based on race or income or other things. But the example in Iowa State was about the Ames School District. So the government-run school district last month, for the first week of February, had a BLM week of action, where they started in kindergarten, went through 12th grade, and they gave kindergartners coloring pages about transgender individuals and said they could pick their sex. This is for kindergartners with coloring pages. The curriculum then throughout the grades even talked about how fathers aren't necessarily needed in the family structure. These are radical indoctrination efforts that we're going to expose, and not just expose, but push back on, and then give parents and students the tools to counter them. They're teaching our students to hate America. They're teaching this here that somehow the founders were just these horrible, awful people, and we're going to counter that by telling about the fundamentals of our founding principles, our Judeo-Christian values, the things that have made this country great and will be going forward. We've got to counter that, or we're going to lose a whole nother wave of a generation.
All right, quick question before I let you go on Wisconsin, because we want it to be a safer haven for fleeing Illinoisans than it currently is under Governor Evers. Is your buddy Reince Priebus going to run for governor, number one? And number two, is Ron Johnson going to run for re-election?
Well, I think those two go together. If Ron doesn't run, I wouldn't be surprised if Reince doesn't think seriously about running for the U.S. Senate, because that's where his expertise would be. He's loving life in the private sector. If he doesn't run, Sean Duffy probably runs for the Senate seat if Ron doesn't. Either way, I'm almost 100% certain that Rebecca Clayfish, who was lieutenant governor for 8 years under me, will run, and she'd be spectacular. She joined me, and she and I were the only two governor and lieutenant governor in American history to survive a recall election. So she's been tested as well. But Reince will be in the mix one way or the other.
Very good. All right. Appreciate
Nice
the
and
insights. Former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, now the president and CEO of Young America's Foundation. And again, the long game plan and your engagement with YAF, Young America's Foundation, YAF.org. Scott, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Have a great one. Keep fighting for freedom. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yep, and he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
If you're talking about it, Dan and Amy are talking about it. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Hi, Amy Jacobson here, and I know I was complaining about the last mortgage company I worked with, how they made me bring a cash to close check. Big surprise that day when you refinance your house. They also took a mortgage payment out of my bank account without telling me. Well, I can tell you folks, that will not happen if you go with United Faith Mortgage. Find them online at unitedfaithmortgage.com. Right now, mortgage rates are at an all-time low, and we don't know how long this is going to last, so be proactive and contact them today. This company is a bit different, and that's on purpose. Faith is at their core, and they take that stance in their marketing as well. Whether you're refinancing or buying a home for the first time, work with the best in the business, United Faith Mortgage. Family owned and operated, they are the ones to contact. And don't forget, if you served in the military, the government offers some really special loan options for veterans. United Faith Mortgage is the way to go. Find them online, unitedfaithmortgage.com.
United Mortgage Corp, Melbourne, New York. NMLS number 1330. Ryan Brecka, NMLS number 65233. For all licensing information, go to nmlsconsumeraccess.org.
All right, it's going to be raining. Are you going to get wet? Wet in your basement? Have you thought that those problems that you had last year were simply going to go away. No, over time, they're only going to get worse. And that's why you need Permaseal Basement Solutions. They'll come over to your house for free and give you an estimate, tell you what's wrong, and tell you what work needs to be done. You know the number, 800-421-SEAL. Permaseal's team believes that your basement and crawl space should be dry all the time, no matter how hard it rains. And again, the number to call is 800-421-SEAL. For a permanently dry basement and a healthy home, you know who to call. Permaseal. They have over 42 years experience, and they have helped more than 450,000 homeowners. So you can rely on them for a permanent waterproofing repairs. 800-421-7325 or visit permaseal.net.
Take control of your documents and data with Content Services and Document Imaging Solutions from IDT.